You're listening to Arsenal Pass, a flesh and blood podcast for players by players. And all about strategy, leveling up, and the latest news in the world of Wraith. Welcome to Arsenal Pass.
Welcome back, everyone, to episode 45 of Arsenal Pass. I'm Brendan Patrick, joined always by calling champion Hayden Dale. Hayden, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. Third time's a charm, right? It's not actually no. Sorry, this is the first time we've tried the intro. Don't worry about that.
I don't know why you would expose me like that, but it was all your fault for us restarting anyway. Yeah, you might hear a wind. Apparently there's a windstorm outside. It's coming through my mic right now. So we got some crazy wind going on here in Texas. But anyway, we are back for our part 3 of Everfest's impact on the classic constructed meta. You all know the deal. We're going to end with grades on heroes based on what cards they got and how we expect them to perform in the meta. And today we have our last 3, which I know everybody is very excited for because Hayden's favorite class is a part of that, which of course is Ranger. Anyway, Hayden, before that, talk to me about your week in Flesh and Blood.
Yeah, I feel like we have a little bit of a cheat sheet maybe. We've got 2 weeks of Everfest under our belt now, right? So maybe these 3 classes, we get a little bit more insight, but no, looking forward to it. This week, I've got first ProQuest coming up on Saturday, as many others do. Very exciting. Looking forward to playing some ProQuest. So just been doing a bit of testing, trying to figure out what deck I'll play for the first week of ProQuest. I want to play a few different heroes across the ProQuest, so I'm just trying to decide what I'll play for the first week. Thought I had locked in, but maybe I'll change that. So we'll see. How about you? How's your week in Flesh and Blood?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of testing. Fortunately, I can't play the first ProQuest due to something that happened that was out of my control. It kind of blows. But I will be back for week 2, and I'm pretty sure I'm playing every single weekend following that. Maybe hitting 4 or 5 events in total. So, yeah, hopefully I'll pick up a W, get that invite, and not have to use one of my PTIs. But anyway, Hayden, let's talk about the news, because something that I was saying that I hoped wouldn't happen, not because it was a bad thing, but because I really wanted to go to Poland. But apparently the calling has been announced, and it's in Poland, and yeah, I can't go, which is a bummer.
Yeah, so it's right. So I called it. Do you remember what I said last week? I was like, it'd be really cool if the Polish community got a calling, so I'm glad that they do. Easter weekend in Poland and in Krakow is going to be the first European calling, so very exciting. It's going to be Blitz, which is, I think it was interesting. I was surprised that we're getting a Blitz calling for the first European calling, but I guess it kind of falls before the Pro Tour, and after the ProQuest season, so I guess that's Blitz season technically, because we also have skirmish season happening in that time as well. So just a few details on the call in Krakow. It's Friday 15th of April to the Sunday 17th. It's Blitz constructed. You can check out on Fab TCG for all the details on entry and where the venue is, because I definitely cannot say the venue name, so I'll leave that to you to go look at Fab TCG. But the venue looks awesome. It's like this big industrial. They put up a picture of it. It looks so cool. It's like a big industrial kind of converted barn or something. I don't know. It looks massive. So yeah, and I know there was some content creators who were giving out golden tickets, passes to the event from LSS. Mm-hmm. So I think if you go look on Fab TCG, you can see which creators have those, and you can go and enter their competitions to get yourself a free entry into the call in Krakow. So yeah, very, very exciting stuff. Brendan?
Yeah, I'm devastated I can't go. Poland's one of my favorite destinations. And you can spend some time in Poland, maybe play the calling, do some sightseeing, and you can take that train over to Prague for a little bit. That would have been fun. Unfortunately, it lands in these the only 3 months of my life for the past 2.5 years in which I don't have the freedom to travel like that. So I'll be at the next one, I guess. But yeah, Hayden, what do you think about a Blitz calling? You're pretty opinionated on Blitz.
Am I? I think Blitz is a good format for the game.
Very.
I think we talked about it before around having Blitz events for ProQuest season, and I know there's one for the Pro Tour has a Blitz Battle Hardened, right, for PTI. So I thought that was a step up in terms of using Blitz. Interested to see a calling. I think the last Blitz calling was quite cool because it was the first sort of Blitz format ever in terms of it was Ira, Kano, Warrior, but it was pretty dominated by Ira, to be honest. So it'll be interesting to see what happens as the first kind of high-level Blitz events we've had in, by this time, a year and a half. So Yeah, I mean, it's not if I was on the fence of going to this calling, which I'm not because it kind of falls right before the Pro Tour anyway, so just feasibly I can't go. I think Blitz might put me off a little bit, but it's cool to see that we're going to have a higher level Blitz event, and we did talk about maybe the impact of this. So
yeah, people feel very passionate about a Blitz calling, but I think it was pretty telegraphed, and it's also important. Like if they're gonna print and like there's so much set design that was for Blitz, and if they weren't going to make that format competitive whatsoever, kind of felt a bit wasted. I don't know. I think Blitz, I've said it a million times, I think people overplay the variance of that format. I think it's still a very skill-based format. That being said, of course, it doesn't really doesn't compare with Class Constructed, but I would rather play a Blitz Swiss rather than a Tales of Aria sealed Swiss for sure, because Tales of Aria sealed Swiss sucks. So we're talking about variants. I mean, we've had worse, but ultimately you do get to play draft in that Swiss as well if you do progress. But I digress. Hayden, talk to me about these rule changes. This is a big deal. We got the 2.0.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so much. I guess it's not so much rule changes, but we do have the release of the Comprehensive Rules 2.0 by Legend Story Studios, which is definitely an update. There were certain things that were kind of given or passed down, I guess, as ruling statements, but weren't necessarily captured in Comprehensive Rules. And there's some updates to how the game works, basically, in terms of some of the structure. A lot of it is very, it's very in the detail, very minute. It's about very small interactions and just ways of things being worded slightly differently. Often they still work in the same way. I think it's just, future-proofing and clarifying a lot of things and the way the game works. But there is a few big changes that have come out of this for sure. The concession rule is getting a change. So you can now concede before time is called in a round. So where previously you couldn't, concede unless you had extenuating circumstances during a match. So that's interesting. I think the sort of like reasoning given behind this was definitely around the idea of like games finishing, and I think it's just an update on where they were before. They really had this idea of protecting players from being pressured to concede, but I think now we have probably a middle ground, which is going to make some people happy. I'm sure some people will still be unhappy. I think it makes sense to have this change.
Yeah. I'm definitely not in favor of more ambiguity, because the previous rule was a little bit ambiguous. It was like, if you don't think you have any way to win the game, and it's like, okay, is that subjective? And then some people were like, yes, it is, and some people said apparently it's not, and you could get like in big trouble for conceding, and who knows? Maybe the judge couldn't see what you could see in terms of not having a way to win the game. But Hayden and I have said this a million times. There was definitely a period of time in Flesh and Blood when there was a lot of politicking for concessions, especially during extra turns. That going away and not being a part of the game is a good thing. But I do hope that these rules help this situation be less ambiguous rather than more.
Yeah, I think it will, but you can't concede. You can't concede once time is called in the round, right? Which is where a lot of the issues were happening, where it's like people play out their 3 or 5 turns, whatever it was originally, and then it's like, then there's like 2 minutes spent about people like, well, I could have done this and I could have done that, like almost like a political kind of back and forth on concession. Whereas so this can only be done during time. You do still have to call a judge over, but you can have any reason, which I think removes ambiguity about why people are conceding. I'm not going to win this game. I'm going to concede. I don't want to play the rest of this game out. I'm going to concede, whatever it might be. So, I think it makes sense. But like you say, it'd be interesting to see how this kind of plays out. To be fair, the old concession rules never really changed much as far as I was concerned. It didn't really impact games. It didn't really come up much, to be honest, in terms of any sort of negative impacts, I thought. But yeah. Just calling out some other changes going across these in terms of the Comprehensive Rules 2.0. There's been some major intellect penalties. In terms of the major intellect penalties have been reduced from an IP5 to an IP4. I think that, makes sense. It felt like IP5 in this formats we've been in felt like basically a game loss, right?
I've never had an IP5.
Ask Dante Delfico.
Yeah, ask Dante Delfico, always late to his matches.
So
that was actually a ridiculous situation. Calling Orlando, Dante went to the restroom, which I know you're not supposed to do, and then he was probably 10-15 seconds late to his round. I think he got an IP5. I think he has to judge if he should have just not wiped instead. But anyway.
Yeah, so the changes to IP5 dropped to an IP4 as the highest as the major intellect penalty. Draft times for professional events have been changed, so less time makes sense. I mean, I remember sitting in Orlando on Friday watching the kind of drafts unfold, and it felt like there were 2 hours to do per draft, and my nationals felt very long as well. Just the later picks felt like there's a lot of unneeded time, so they've reduced that. What else have we got? An interesting one. So there's been some changes to the way that cards interact with cost properties. So namely, this interacts with Find Center. So equipment can now be used to defend Find Center. So just important to note that. If you want to understand more about cost properties, go and check out the comprehensive rules. I think there's a bit of like a bulletin on how that works. But yeah, that was quite interesting to me. Or poor Ninja can't catch a break. Awesome. So wrapping up the news, Brendan, just want to shout out a couple of things. Did a video for kind of week 1 of Everfest heading into ProQuest, just 5 decks that I think are very playable, could be top tier, could be options to look at ProQuest for week 1. The format is rapidly evolving, I think, so you know what, check it out. Next week it might be a bit different, but there's a few lists in there that I think can be very good choices for week 1 of ProQuest. Brendan, I wanted to shout out, you did a great deck tech with returning guest T-Bo during the week as well. Their Dash Control deck list, which is going to go up on YouTube before ProQuest Week 1, and also actually up on Patreon. T's been kind enough to write a deck guide, a full deck guide and sideboarding guide for everyone up there. So you can go and check that out. Again, big thank you to all of our patrons. We do have things like that, things like T's Deck Tech. We also have our own deck techs that we put up, plus our additional podcast every month. And we also have, from time to time, analysis videos. And I think we're going to be doing probably one of those very soon as we get into the ProQuest season and get some recorded gameplay, right, Brendan? That's something that we both like to do, is break down games, break down metas and what's happening between two decks that maybe aren't played by us, but played in a finals or a big match like that.
Absolutely, Hayden. Well, like we talked about, there is a windstorm going on outside. I don't know if you're going to be able to keep those coals hot, but if you do, let me know what you got cooking on that Command & Cookout.
Ooh, Brendan, you're gonna have to temper. We're not gonna fire the grill up till the end of the show this week. Something a little bit different on Command & Cookout this week. We are finishing, as Brendan said at the top of the show, part 3 of our Everfest and Classic Constructed, and I've actually solicited from the community some questions around this format and early sort of questions, thoughts they want to hear from us, and we're gonna cover those once we get to the end of the show. So, without further ado, let's get in and talk about the last 3 classes in Everfest Classic Constructed. Want to just give a quick recap to, at the end of each of these classes, if you haven't heard already, we do give a grade, our personal grade on how we think these are going to fare in Everfest, and those grades come from something I want to just give a bit of an outline first. So if we're giving them an A, we think they got a huge boost, and this is now one of the more powerful classes with a lot of tools and could be among the decks to beat. B, we're saying they got some sort of boost, or maybe they stayed sort of near the top, and should be contended through the season. If we give them a C, we're saying, they've gotten very little, or they've gotten slightly worse. Either way, they might see some play and could find a spot in the meta under the right circumstances. And D, unfortunately, we think they've gotten actively worse or stayed bad and are going to be sitting around the fringes of the meta at best. So, Brendan, let's talk about Warrior. If we talk about Warrior in terms of where Warrior was in the previous season, of course, we have Bolton and we have Dorinthia. Kind of really fell off, right? Bolton had like an explosion onto the scene in the Monarch meta, but really fell off during Tales of Aria. And Dorinthia has kind of been a little bit by the wayside for both of the last 2 metas, right?
Yep, definitely in the dumpster, as they would say.
As you say.
So, nope, not me, don't come at me. So yeah, it was really tough for Dorinthia to exist in a Briar meta when Briar was stacking multiple embodiments per turn, because Dorinthia would like to play 5-card hands, and then having extra defense on those cards against someone like Dorinthia, it was a tough spot for sure. And Bolton, honestly, that combo version of Bolton definitely wasn't suited for the Briar meta. In terms of the Raiden version, I'm not too sure. We didn't see it, so I guess it didn't perform very well. But yeah, I have more hope for Bolton than Dorinthia, I think, at this point, because Dorinthia's had a tough time, but don't feel bad for Dorinthia. Dorinthia had her time. She definitely had her time in the sun in the early days of Flesh and Blood, and might be making a comeback with these new one-hander cards.
Yeah, something that we're about to definitely talk about. I do want to just give a bit of a shout to the Warriors, and this this kind of strength of warriors really is around the combat chain, right? Like it is around how the opponent defends. So, traditionally a warrior was very difficult to play against, then people learnt and sort of honed their skills on defending Dorinthia, and she became a bit less of the boogeyman, I guess, of the format. But one thing I do think is that strength of maybe the combat chain might be coming back a little bit, that strength that both the warriors have, and I'm excited to talk about that with some of the cards that we're going to discuss. But I think it's going to depend on how the format kind of plays out in terms of the speed and whatnot. And of course, with Bolton, with Raiden and the Sabers, you have this kind of interesting dynamic of you have a combo deck basically there, and you also have this kind of aggro to mid-range deck, which is really interesting. So I'm excited to see, what people come up with Bolton. Bolton's a hero I really want to play, but I found it, less than exciting as a prospect to play in the last couple of metas. So should we talk about some of the new cards that Warrior is getting and kind of what we...
Yeah, for sure. Before we go there, I want to point out something on notes. Hayden said, literally written by Hayden Dale, he says, the Saber combo and high rolling, because he sees them as one and the same. Mr. Hayden Dale, you better watch what you say. That is not a high roll deck.
Did I actually write that?
Skill-based deck. You wrote that, and I mean, I got to call you out. Just so I could represent my fellow Bolton Saber brothers. What are you doing, Hayden?
Well, anyway. I like Bolton, but I would play Raiden. Anyway, should we talk about the first card? The first card is Blade Runner, which I personally think is the most interesting card that we get from the set for a number of reasons. First of all, I think it's a good card. Second of all, it looks like a mechanologist. And I know there's a lot of discussion around that. So Blade Runner is the warrior attack reaction. It costs 1. At red, it says target one-handed weapon gains go again. Your next weapon attack this turn gets +3, and then yellow and blue drop down to +2/+1. What are your thoughts on, like, we're seeing one-handed cards, like specifically one-handed targeted cards coming?
Yeah, so I've actually had the pleasure of playing against this. It's good. It's good for what it does. It enables a lot of the kind of the other dependent cards. It's important. You need go again on that one-handed weapon. I saw this particularly with the Dorinthia Sabers, not Dorinthia Kasai Sabers, and it felt pretty effective. It did feel ultimately underwhelming in terms of, the one-hander comes in and then it gets +3 and go again. It's like, okay, so you do need something else to follow up past that. But yeah, I think it's a huge enabler card.
Yeah, the rate on this card's great, right? Like, go again is kind of at a premium in Warrior previously, right? Like, it was, obviously Bolton has that inbuilt, but for Dorinthia, it's like, okay, Warrior's Valor, people were playing, like, Driving Blade for a while to make things work, whereas now you have these, like, Hit and Run was then, like, the next card out of Crucible, but it wasn't, like, super, like, if you played on the first weapon, it was, just go again. That didn't feel great. Whereas now you have, a buff and a go again for one resource feels pretty good, but it's not the only attack reaction we get. We also get in the swing, 0 cost. Play in the swing only if you've attacked 2 or more times with weapons this turn. So again, really looking to be, it could be two-handed or one-handed, it doesn't specify, but to attack, with this, you have to at least attack with the weapon twice, so you can play it on the second weapon. It says target weapon gets +3 at red and then drops down again. This one I'm less excited about. That stipulation of having to have attacked twice means that this is always pigeonholed into either it's your second blade attack with Dawnblade, or it's your second axe or second saber attack. That's, I think, quite a bit less exciting to me.
Yeah, massive liability if you stick this in Arsenal and then somehow get put on the back foot. It's going to probably sit there for a while. It's hard for me to play cards that have these sort of very strict stipulations, and then if you can't meet them, like you effectively have a dead Arsenal for a very long time. Maybe you just have the heuristic to never Arsenal this card, but I know if I ever threw it in my Arsenal, it would be the following turn I would get Crippling Crushed, and then it would be back to back to back to back. But, +3, not bad, add 0, and of course blocks 3, like a traditional warrior card, so I'm sure we'll see it played. Yep.
I think we'll see some play. I think it might be for certain styles of, like an all-out aggressive Axis Dorinthia or something. Outland Skirmish is an interesting card to me. Sharpened Steel, 4 through 6, effectively. Outland Skirmish is a 0 cost warrior action. It says your next one-handed weapon, so again with the one-handed weapon, attack this turn gains +3. That's at red. And the next time a weapon attacks this turn, create a copper token, go again. I think the last bit of text is maybe a little bit irrelevant unless you want to be playing cash-ins in your deck, which I still think is, just with the amount of new cards we have, is really difficult to fit that card in. But I don't mind this card. It's sharp and steel with a slight upside for one-handed weapon decks. So
I also really like it for the same reasons. That being said, you saying the copper token doesn't matter. You are liable to potentially eat your words on that one, I think.
Sure, that's fine. I didn't say it didn't matter, I just said less relevant.
Yeah. Trying to evaluate the relevance of copper from like a theoretical perspective before you get your hands on the card, I feel like is trying to do like linear calculus. It's like, it just feels like it doesn't matter, but who knows what we'll see in the future.
Yeah, I have messed around with some Dorinthia kind of builds. Haven't played too many games in terms of one-handed decks, and this really does just feel like sharp and steel 4 through 6 for me, which isn't bad, to be honest, in a format where we're coming out of a format where defending was very minimal, right? Unless you're playing against old time, and I don't know how that's going to shape up. I think it's going to be somewhat similar. There's going to be some decks that want to defend a lot. There's going to be some decks that want to defend some, and then there's going to be a few decks that don't want to defend. And so Elden Skirmish being, just an automatic buff, it's not reprise or anything. I do like the idea of playing less reprise cards in some of these warrior builds, but we can talk about that when we get to the archetypes. Other cards just to kind of look at in warrior. Helm of the Sharp Eye, of course, is the new majestic helmet for warrior. So it's the attack reaction, cost 1, destroy Helm of Sharp Eye, banish the top card of your deck. You may play it this combat chain, and you can only activate Helm of the Sharp Eye if you control a weapon with greater than twice its base attack. Very interesting. So, that's again where I like the idea of sharpened steels and things like that. If you're playing something like Helm of the Sharp Eye, is you give +3 to your axe, you come in with the axe, and then Helm of Sharp Eye is active. But it is good to note that you can't play non-attack actions off this because it has to be played on the combat chain. So non-attack action would break the combat chain. So at first glance, I was like, oh, this card is really powerful. You can play anything off the top. It's effectively draw a card. It's not quite. It doesn't play non-attack actions. It needs to either be an attack action or more likely in Warrior, an attack reaction, right?
Yeah, so you're a big fan of Unified Decree. What do you
I am.
think
I
of
actually am.
Counter-Strike?
Yes, I am. I literally am.
Does this fall under your same, the same category of your love for Unified Decree?
It's close. I do really genuinely like Unified Decree, and I think that card is been criminally underplayed. I'm not really a warrior player, but when I have played warrior, it's a card that I've tried to build around and play, and I think it has legs into the future. I think that's a powerful effect. Helm of the Sharp Eye is similar in that regard, and I think there's something to be built around there in terms of whether it's a two-handed or one-handed list. I actually think you could manipulate these. I'm sure this Helm of the Sharp Eye and Unified Decree will fit better into one in a certain style. But of course, that does have the reprise aspect, right? So you do need to be in a meta where defending is somewhat advantageous, which we could well be in. So, I like this card. I do like this card a lot.
What do you think about Shatter? If you're playing Viscerai and you have a Bloodsheath Scalata, are you playing around Shatter as a default? Or do you think it's one of those things that you're just never going to really play around? Maybe it gets you the first time, then you learn your lesson. What do you think? I
think it's easy to play around, so I think you play around it. That's kind of interesting. Like Shadow, I was really interested when it came out. I was like, oh wow, this card seems quite strong. It's only two-handed weapons, but that's still Dawnblade is still a very powerful weapon and probably the default weapon for Dorinthia at this point in time. But yeah, if I think my opponent's on Shatter or they've got the the Singing Steelblade, I can just not defend with the equipment, right? Like it's annoying. Maybe I need to defend with that equipment, but something like a Scalata deck probably also has access to Grasp and to Skullcap, so probably has access to equipment to use. So the more I see this card, the less less whelmed I am by it.
More underwhelmed, yeah. Probably a better English.
Yeah, that's true. I'm more interested in Helm of the Sharp Eye and maybe even Oath of Steel, which is the another majestic there, which is the red warrior action that when you attack with a weapon this turn, put a +1 counter on it, and then at the beginning of the end phase, destroy your +1 counters. It feels like there's a very strong sort of combo aspect with that card, and I like combo cards, whether I end up playing them or not. My intrigue is always there for this. It feels like if you can set up a big turn with maybe like a Flock of the Featherwalker Quicken Token or Time Snaps, or you are able to almost have 6-7 cards worth. You've got Courage of Bladehold. Maybe there's a way that you can come in with some weapons multiple times and do a lot of damage. This seems like maybe there's something in here with Luminaris. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, after your analysis, I think I am notably less whelmed as well.
by what's it called?
Shatter.
I've already forgotten the name. I'd be interested. I think you probably play it in Dawnblade lists, whether it's just a one-off that you can fetch with singing, and it probably needs to be into the right meta. But the fact that you can destroy relevant equipment is pretty good.
It's a cool toolbox card.
Yep, agree. Which is I think Dorinthia's happy to have those. I want to talk about some of the archetypes, I guess, that kind of maybe come out with Everfest. Previously, we talked about Dorinthia. It's been focused on Dawnblade, right? It's been Dawnblade lists. It's been maybe go tall or go wide, but it's been Dawnblade. I think the one-handed weapon clearly gets a buff here. I think that's pretty obvious. But I actually think that the Axes build is the one that I would be looking at. I think Spilled Blood is a really strong card, and we haven't seen that card be used from Monarch. And I think now with these one-handed buffs, I think there's a Dorinthia build with Axes that can actually be quite scary. Can it sort of shape up in terms of an aggro deck that can compete with the other aggro decks in the meta? And we talk about Bravo, star of the show, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about in the questions we have from listeners. But this idea of this list being here and being able to utilize Spilled Blood and really strong sort of sequences of axe attacks and big 5-card hands as well as just kind of good 3-card hands. I really like this idea of a potential Axes Dorinthia.
Yeah, I agree as well. I've played against the Sabres Dorinthia, and probably the coolest thing it did was that new potion, the one that destroys your arsenal if you do exactly 2 damage, had that on the field. So the swords were able to kind of threaten that.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that's kind of cool as well. But yeah, I'm interested to see. I think my question is, do you think that Dorinthia Axes per se is going to be better than Dorinthia Dawnblade?
I don't know, but I also think Dorinthia Dawnblade is potentially very good. So I actually think Warrior gets a bit of a bump in the set, if not just the sort of meta changing a little bit, but also some of these cards I think are really strong. I think it's going to take us time to work out cards like I'm so bad with names, Oath of Steel. I think the card clearly has some big upside, but how does it effectively get used? I feel like Warrior's been a little bit underdiscovered. Players have been less, there's been less players working on sort of Warrior builds, I think. The last kind of big one was the Saber Bolton deck, the combo deck. So yeah, I think there's maybe, is Oath now goes into there and there's an even sort of more consistent, stronger combo, or does it look completely different? Is Dorinthia Axes the way to go? Is Dawnblade the way to go? I think there's so much to explore, and that's kind of my thoughts so far, really.
So I think in the context of the meta, it's probably going to have to be the one-handers, because Dorinthia Dawnblade really gets just shreked by Prism, usually. It's not that great into Guardian either. We think we're seeing a lot of Guardian in Prism right now, so I'm on the side of one-handed being what's going to show up. Yeah,
so I guess getting onto that, if we were to play a Warrior right now, what would you play? Like, I would personally look at building a Dorinthia Axes deck. Like, I think that is where I would start. Spilled Bloods, Blade Runners. Probably I would play some reprise cards. You get access to the specialization, so I'd play Singing. I would play Iron Song Response, I think. That's probably most of the reprise cards I'd play. And then I'd just play some like buffs, and I would just trying to set up some good 5-card hands with Spilled Blood. So maybe I'm looking to play like Flock of the Featherwalker as well in that deck, or some way that I want resources on the board before I start those turns. I want to almost have like 7-card hands, and now I have these weapons that can sort of abuse that, especially with Spilled Blood. So what could that look like? Like what could I make that look like? Maybe I'm less excited about Time Stamp Potion, but
yeah, I mean, that's adorable. There's definitely a lot of thought that went into that. I'd play Saber Bolton because it's the best deck ever created. But yeah, you're probably not going to catch me on a Warrior this season unless it's someone breaks something. So maybe Dorinthia Axes, but I'd have to see. I suspect that in the current state of the meta, Warrior is going to struggle a little bit.
Yeah, I think it might, but I'm going to give a shout out to Oath of Steel. I think that card is ready to be used and abused, so go and do what you will with that. Just wrapping it up on Warrior, I would say probably I'm a bit optimistic. I'm going to give Warrior a B- in terms of grading. I think there's a chance that Warrior becomes a meta player and sits around that kind of fringe of of tier 2, tier 1. I think there's a chance. We'll see. I could be completely wrong, but I like the cards we're getting, and I feel like there's stuff to be explored there.
So hard to grade because like the one-handed archetype is very obviously it's existed quotation mark, but it's very new, and surely it's much better against Prism, which was like Dorinthia's worst nightmare. So I'm actually I'm leaning towards C just because I just don't think that like what Warrior used to do. It just feels, at least what Dorinthia used to do, it just feels a bit outdated to the current game of Flesh and Blood, where it's just pushing damage and really punishing you for blocking, where we find a lot of decks that end up just, they have a lot of disruption, they go extremely tall, or they're comboing, something like Viscerai, Starva going really tall, having disruption, Bravo going really tall, having disruption, and then you have Prism, who's now probably landing multiple auras per turn if possible, as well as, of course, the Heralds, which Dorinthia hates. So for me, I'm going to throw it as a C, and I'll go ahead and eat my words. Obviously, Bolton Saber's an A, though. S tier, actually, above that. But, yeah, Warrior, a C for me.
Okay, cool. I do think it's important for us to probably note this. Like, we did our first Everfest in Classic Constructed Part 1 pod 2 weeks ago, and the format is already adapting and evolving, right? So I think that we're going to talk about Prism, we're going to talk about Illusionist. It's the last class we're going to talk about. That was the one that we purposely wanted to leave till later because we thought was probably going to be the deck to beat, right, coming into this. And it looks like that might not be the case. It might be that Prism is the second or third best deck in the format, but it doesn't look like, especially right now, to be the deck to beat, right? So there is some caveats around the format is changing, and that's why I think if I'm using my grading, I think there's cards here that can be utilized. It's just whether it's going to play out the way we think it is. So yeah, I think like C plus B minus, I think is a good spot.
Yeah, Warrior got some tools, right? It didn't get the brute treatment, so I think that its power level increased from Everfest, where Brute did with a couple of cards, but overall, I think Brute got a lot of fluff.
Sure. All right, bringing it on to our second class today, we're going to talk about Ranger. Ranger's an interesting one, right? I guess if we can cover off Azalea pretty quickly in terms of never really found a foothold in the competitive meta. You want to comment?
No, it's just like, I mean, I don't know. It's just some fighting words. Are you sure? Yeah, I mean, Lexi though. Lexi looked like it was going to get a foothold in that last format, and it did, of course, in the form of Ice. But not only Ice, we're also talking about Lightning, and Aggro Lexi was also it was a pretty strong deck, right? So maybe just Lexi overall is holding the torch for Ranger players.
I think definitely. I think these more aggressive kind of like dual element or more lightning based, in particular like post spam, were really strong, but they just didn't get their time to shine. Really, trying to play a lightning deck into that format where Briar had the still before nerfs, right, was really difficult. So Lexi's a really interesting one to me coming into this format because I think it was quite a strong hero coming in. So what happens to that now? Of course, you get hit by the ball lightning banning. So does that make lightning less viable? What about Ice? But then we get some fantastic tools, which we're going to talk about. But in terms of just Ranger hitting in, I think one of the things that made Lexi quite strong is like you have access to these elemental abilities, right? You have access to, first of all, be able to play both the sides of the elements plus some of the strong Ranger cards that you got from Crucible that maybe just Azalea couldn't use to the fullest extent because it didn't have the support package around it that I think Lexi has. So yeah, to me, Lexi coming into Everfest in a really interesting spot, and then some really cool cards. So let's talk about some of them.
Do you think Azalea is just like hopeless, right? Because we've seen, I mean, obviously that deck has gotten some support in Tales of Varia and now in Everfest, but like I feel like at least in my mind and what seems to be, from what I hear, it seems like Lexi has just eclipsed Azalea as the go-to Ranger.
One of the things I kind of take about Ranger is that both Lexi and Azalea have a lot of the same constraints around deck building and play patterns, right? No weapon, arrows that need to be played from Arsenal. Like the deck building requirements are very similar. So I think that kind of, unfortunately, I think that means that Lexi just kind of does a better job than Azalea because of, the hero ability, the access to elemental cards, and the bows, like I think that's kind of what pushes Lexi over the edge. And I think that, although Azalea has this like dominate ability and you get to play Skullbone Crosswrap, and that's why I think they printed New Horizon at the same hit spot as to make this kind of decision. It doesn't really feel like a decision, unfortunately. So yeah, it does feel a little bit hopeless, unfortunately. I don't know if that'll ever change. Maybe we get a talented Azalea, and that really changes things up. That could happen, right?
True.
So let's talk about some of these cards. The one that's most intriguing to me, and I think the biggest upgrade that Ranger gets, and in particular when I'm gonna be using my frame of sort of conversation mostly through Legacy, to be honest, but Rain Razors is a really powerful card. Not only is it, so Rain Razors is a yellow instant, Ranger instant, and it says all arrows attacking arrows this turn get +2. For some reason it's not coming up my screen. I don't know why. It doesn't defend. It's yellow, right?
Yeah, it is very powerful. If you play against Alexi or even Azalea in this format, that's the card that you're gonna see across the table first, and be like, wow, okay, that's a card that exists. In particular, the funniest situation I see this card is when people draw it off a 3 of a kind and they can't play it, draw it in multiples. But overall, this +2 does remain throughout the turn. So in something like Voltaire Lexi, that's aggressive orientated, it's super, super powerful.
Yeah, well, you look at how strong a Lightning Press was as like an attack reaction. You have Rain Razors, so it's one less than a Lightning Press, but it's on all your arrow attacks this turn. So it's an attack reaction, effectively, because it can play at instant speed. It also gives buffs to your full go wide turn if you're coming in. It's very easy with Lexi, for instance, to come with 3 arrows. That's +6 at instant speed. That is a really, really strong effect at yellow. At any pitch value, but at yellow as well, you get that ability to pitch it early if you need to, if you draw multiples like you talked about. Also, in combination with Bolt and Shot, this is like fantastic, right? Because it means you can actually Arsenal Bolt and Shots and still play them and get that go again at instant speed. It means that you 3 of a kind into a Bolt and Shot, you might be able to get that Rain Razors into your arsenal to play out. So, I really like this card, and I think there's a lot of synergy starting to happen with this card and cards from particular Tales of Aria.
Yeah, 100%.
Let's talk about Tri-Shot. I think this one is a little bit less underwhelming to me. It's a bit more underwhelming, rather.
Less underwhelming?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think the use case that I see is just in the combo deck, right? In the OTK deck we've talked about so many times on this channel. The infamous one that kind of doesn't exist. You'd love it in that deck, I think. But, after playing that Lexi deck, the one that you're talking about, the one that's a bit more aggro and uses Voltaire, it's hard for me to imagine a consistent scenario where I'd want to use this card.
Yeah. I think it, like you say, it is a bit more based around that kind of. So with Azalea, it's kind of cool, right? With Death Dealer, potentially very cool because you get to draw 3 cards off of it. So pitch a blue, activate the bow 3 times, and draw 3 cards, and put those 3. So that's a really cool effect potentially. But I think in these Lexi aggressive decks or Lexi elemental decks or these sort of more modern decks, I think it's very tough to find a spot for that. But maybe we go back and we look at this really kind of like Death Dealer combo deck and Tri-Shot finds a space. That is interesting in Azalea.
How good is that? Because when you say it like that, it sounds really good. Yeah,
it's pretty good. But again, the constraints of these needing to be arrows, you potentially need to draw some. So say you go Tri-Shot into 3 of a kind, right? Well, I need to draw some number of arrows in amongst my Death Dealers in this. So that's and also I need my arrows to have go again. So it probably involves a I'm going to forget the name. The one that gives your arrows, face-up arrows, go again this turn. Just forgotten. Or a Perch Grapplers. It's going to require something like that, right? So, very, very interesting. I want to talk about Fatigue Shot. This one's really interesting to me. I think this one is very, very good. And I know a lot of Ranger players out there, like Yuki, have said that they think Fatigue Shot is very, very strong. Potentially one of the strongest arrows printed. And I tend to agree. This card is, I don't know if I think it's one of the strongest printed, but I do think it's very, very good. So Fatigue Shot is a common cycle at red. It costs 1, attacks for 5, defense for 3, and says when Fatigue Shot hits a hero, the base attack of their first attack action they play during their next turn is halved, rounded up. So, a bit of a tool against Guardian, which Lexi hasn't really had before, right?
Yeah, I think we need to ask ourselves if it's good enough just in general, right? It's important that it says attack action, right? Mm-hmm. Like, that's very relevant. So is this good enough against, a Briar, right? Because it's obviously good against Guardian, against something like a Starvo or something like that, rounding down these massive attacks. But do you think this is good enough against a go-wide deck that has an average attack value of 4 on most of their attacks?
Yeah, let me rephrase Fatigue Shot for you then. So what if Fatigue Shot said, when this hits, your opponent's first attack next turn gets -2 attack? Pretty good, right? One for 7 on terms of like damage return. You come up for 5. It's a breakpoint that's hard to deal with because 4 is increasingly becoming a breakpoint that's a bit easier to deal with. 5 gets over defense reactions. It requires a card plus equipment. But if it does hit, you're coming in 5 damage and then -2 to an attack like a lightning surge or maybe a lightning embodiment into snatch coming in for 2. That's a lot more manageable. That's, first of all, not only are you getting a -2. You're halving that attack, you're actually also getting them down to a breakpoint that's more manageable. So I think Fatigue Shot is very, very strong, especially when you kind of contextualize what it could do. Come in, you hit this, you rain raises it over the top, and your opponent's trying to play a crippling crush next turn.
Yeah. And then its floor is not bad at all.
So. Exactly, its floor is not bad. I think, to your point, its floor is not bad, but its ceiling is really, really good. So yeah, probably one of the cards, as I have started to play a little bit of Ranger, getting back to my Ranger roots a little bit, it's a card that I like quite a lot. Let's talk about Read the Glide. Read the Glide Path, which is a Ranger action. At red, we're looking at it's a common cycle, defense for 2. Your next arrow attack this turn gains +3. It has opt 1 and go again, and then yellow is +2, blue is +1. So it's a nimblism for arrows that also opts. Seems reasonable.
It does seem very reasonable.
Is it good enough?
I mean, surely you'd be... is it good enough? Is always a question. I mean, might be playing this in Azalea, right?
Feels like an Azalea card to me. It doesn't feel like a Lexi card unless you're looking at these really... what's the opt getting you, right? Is the kind of thing you need to look at. So would I want Nimblism in my Lexi deck? Or, I've got access to Seek and Destroy. Is that a better effect? Probably. So what is Read the Glide Path getting me? Well, I need that opt to be worth something. Potentially with Azalea, right? So yeah, this feels like an Azalea card to me, but these cards for Azalea to me just don't feel quite good enough to be like, I want that hero ability, unfortunately. I feel. Maybe if I could play Azalea with a Voltaire, I don't know, maybe I would then.
I mean, honestly, after Try Shot, I'm kind of more interested in trying it out.
Yeah, sure we can. Dreadball, what's your thoughts on Dreadball? So of course the new weapon, which stops, has this passive ability. It's a once per turn action that you can put an arrow card from your hand face up into your empty arsenal zone. So same as some other arrows, but this one says empty arsenal zone. Oh, it says an empty arsenal zone, so that still does work. But it gets +1 until end of turn. So Death Dealer draws. This one gives you +1. But then it does have this passive, which says arrows you control have defense reactions can't be played from hand. This chain link. So that works on all your arrows. Basically, it says that your opponent, when you come in with an arrow, they can't play a defense reaction from hand. It's going to have to be from arsenal or not at all.
Yeah, so Rangers had this theme of anti-defense reactions since its inception. I remember it was actually expected to have quite an impact on the Arcane Rising format because it was so defensive at that point. Alas, it didn't. I think that Dreadbore actually kind of sucks, to be honest. It just seems underwhelming, like that passive doesn't seem very relevant. They can still play the defense reactions out of Arsenal, which is probably where they would be putting those sync blows and things like that. And just getting +1 instead of drawing the card, I'm not too sure. What about you?
I think the idea of this card is going to do more work than the actual card itself is going to do. I think the fact that people have to respect that someone might bust out a Dreadbore on them. To be fair though, like if people are busting out a Dreadbore on them, people might just be happy. They're like, yeah, my defense reactions now are worse, but also your deck is worse. My opponent's deck is worse in terms of what I'm playing into. So I think
your permanent on the field that is core to your deck is significantly worse.
Yeah, than having like a Voltaire or having Death Dealer or whatever it is. So I think that's... Sorry. I'll just put an edit there. Where was I? We're talking about...
Should have left that one in.
But I put my phone on silent after I did that. Cool. Clearly I did not. Okay. Let me go again. Yeah, so my thought is that this card is going to do a lot more work as an idea, as people thinking, oh, what if they have Dreadbore? What if they play Dreadbore? And people wanting to minimize defense reactions or, maybe playing less defense reactions in their lists. And I think that's sentiment that seems to be shared by a lot of, Ranger players, much more qualified than myself that I have talked to. So, Anything else you want to talk about? I think we're going to talk about Battering Bolt, right?
Yeah, tell me the use case of this card. Talk to me about it. Talk to me about the power ceiling.
So the power ceiling. Okay, so it's a 2-cost Majestic Arrow, 6 attack, it's at red pitch line. When Battering Bolt hits a hero, they reveal their hand and discard all cards other than action cards. They lose 1 life for each card discard this way. So, it's going to hit defense reactions, it's going to hit instants.
Yeah.
That's kind
Things
of it.
I probably don't want to be playing a lot of if I'm playing against Ranger. It feels like a card that might be designed for the future, or is at least designed as like a toolbox card that you can use into a somewhat degenerate format or something like that. Other than that, I just don't know. This is a weird one.
Yeah, that's kind of what it feels like to me. So a 2-cost arrow at 6 feels underwhelming to me. Like, it's not really what I'm going to be playing. I want my ranger decks to be very cost conservative. So, maybe you could play this with increase the tension, plus you got Dreadbore and you stop people from being able to play defense reactions or whatever it is.
Instants are funny because they're definitely just going to play in response, right?
Yeah, that's what's true. Release the tension is the card I was thinking of. But yeah, I guess against reactions, right? Maybe this is good into a warrior meta with a bunch of... I don't know. Honestly, I'm not sure what the ceiling is on this card. It seems like it's a card that's been printed to potentially counteract something that we're not seeing in the format right now. And yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of... I don't see this seeing much play, to be honest, unless it becomes relevant as like a pure effect.
Yeah, I think so as well.
Cool. All right, so how do we see... Let's move on. We've talked about some of the new cards, and this is anything else you want to talk about. Release the tension, I think, is kind of whatever timidity point. I don't think Dominate is relevant enough, and it looks like a very different very different ranger deck if you're playing that arrow, I think. So in terms of like archetypes, right? Like the thing that's kind of getting me most excited about Ranger, as I said, Lexi coming into the format seemed really intriguing to me. It seemed like it would have been a reasonable choice at nationals that I went to. That sort of almost pre-ban into the format, but maybe the sort of the non-errata on Briar was just too good still. But I thought that once that sort of post-ban, post-errata, Lexi felt really good coming into this format. So I honestly think it gets better. I think that if I'm looking at building a range right now, I'm looking at a Lexi deck. I'm probably looking at something that can abuse Rain Razors. I'm looking at something with I think Bolt and Shot is very good. I'm looking at this probably a very go wide centric deck, and then I'm looking to put in an element there, whether that's lightning to help you go wide, whether that's ice for the relevancy of the on-hit effects. I think it'll be format dependent and what you're trying to target and counteract. But yeah, I really like the look of what Lexi looks like going to this format, and I'm surprised it's had such low sort of hype and discussion so far in sort of the general discourse.
I like this aggro Lexi deck that plays Voltaire, but also splashes for Channel Frigid. That deck seems very powerful. Maybe not powerful enough, but it's close. So I definitely have my eyes on it. This is actually one of the decks I was considered playing week one. Not even kidding. Was Lexi.
You might need to do some testing then.
What do you mean? I've been testing Lexi. What are you talking about?
Okay, all right. Yeah. I'm not privy to those testing sessions.
Oh God, that's because you test in the morning with the chumps. At night we're jamming Lexi. Yeah. Now I'm starting to think for some reason as we've been going through these Ranger cards, I'm just wondering why that deck doesn't play Poison the Tips. I think that I'm probably adding I'm adding that to my sideboard now.
Might be good. Yeah, it's a card really though, right?
It does.
So, yeah, I mean, I think Lexi's in a strong spot. I'm interested to see. I think there's a little bit of, wiggle room. I think there's probably, if you go and build yourself a Lexi deck right now, I think if you just, even before you decide which element you're going to play, I think you have 30 cards you're immediately putting in, and then you're deciding which direction you're going from there. And I think that's a really cool spot to be in. And I think Lexi has some power. So, wrap it up on Ranger. I'm going to give, I'm giving Ranger a B+. This is the most positive I've been about Ranger. I spent 3 months playing Azalea and, felt pretty... what was the word?
Depressed is a fine word.
Yeah, I was just losing a bit of hope for Ranger, sort of through the formats. But Lexi was exciting when it came out, and then it felt like maybe it wasn't quite the right time. But I really felt like coming into this new format, Lexi was in a good spot, and I do think these cards help a lot. Rain Razors, what a card.
Yeah, it's going to be a B for me, and I'm personally insulted that you doubted my Ranger mastery. The amount of time and effort I've been putting into the deck is incredible. No, I have been playing it a lot, though, and it's very powerful. It's a bit of a meta call, but it could be the right deck. It's very good. It's decently good into some other decks that are on my radar that aren't currently super represented. Right now, I think week one, we're going into a bunch of Starvos. Mirrors. Eventually, we have to talk about what does that mirror look like? It's got to be hilariously bad.
Played it.
I digress. That is definitely a tangent. Anyway, let's talk about Illusionist. My favorite class, like I mentioned on our video, we have a video go up on the YouTube, Illusionist versus Dash. I do mention that it is a class that I've been hiding for over a year now, just due to sheer power level. And I worry that my playing of it could get the class banned. It's so dynamic, so interesting, and I'm a closet Illusionist. Anyway, Hayden, let's dig into it.
I mean, it clearly is. I think it is a very interesting class.
It is.
Point. I think in Monarch, it was I played it at the start of the format. I felt like you had to be reasonably one-dimensional. I didn't enjoy the sort of play style of it. But with these new cards, I'm intrigued. I think it's probably still not one of the classes that kind of speaks to me in terms of play style. But you have been playing some Prism. So.
I've been playing Prism and Lexi. That's the thing. You don't know me anymore. I've been playing these new decks. But yeah, I actually really like the new Prism. We'll talk about some of the reasons why, because they printed some ridiculous cards for Prism. They're actually like counterintuitive to what we thought like the Illusionist downside, right, was. They get these overcosted, or these push cards. Yeah, undercosted push cards that have a downside. And now when you look at something like gosh, what is the name of it? I don't know why it slips to my tongue, because it's one of my favorite cards. I'll find it right here. Coalescence Mirage. That card is so good. Like, they break that, and then you drop your 0 aura. And the thing about the 0 cost auras as well is, we look at them, we first evaluate them, we evaluate their text, right? What they do as permanents on the field. But fundamentally, if you have a Luminaris, they are like sticky weapons. They're weapons that don't go away unless someone's spending an action point or has a card that deals with that. And that's very, very powerful.
Yeah. Well, let's before we jump into talking about specific cards, because I think there's some great things to dive into there. Give me a little bit of a where was Prism in the last meta, because it's been a very interesting journey for Prism. Prism's breakout was winning. Prism really showed up, to be honest. We go back to the start of Monarch Road to National Season. Prism was one of the most played decks, but the least sort of one of the worst performing heroes. But then wins Vegas, kind of disappears with Tales of Aria, right? And then wins New Zealand Nationals. So Prism is a meta core, is a spike deck. Like, what does Prism actually look like?
Yeah. It winning New Zealand Nationals is just like the icing on the cake, right? Because Prism was really bad in that format. I genuinely believe that. Like, Prism into Briar was terrible. But the answer to Briar was Guardian. It was Oldhim, and to an extent, it was Bravo as well. And so many people swapped over to those decks to try to answer the Briar decks that Prism ended up just dominating the Guardians and winning New Zealand Nationals. So I think it's hilarious, right? Because it was the right deck at the right time. And, I think if you had asked me back in Tales of Aria, like, what's one of the worst decks in the format, I probably would have said Prism.
Yeah, and then just really shows the power of this game and how metas evolve and change, and then how the right call at the right time. So I believe Nick Holding, who won New Zealand Nationals, didn't play against a Briar, so managed to dodge them, because Briar became a lot less represented than it had at other nationals because of, just the power of people adapting to the meta, playing old time, people playing Viserai, and then he preyed on those. He played a lot of old times, he played a lot of Bravos, he played versus Viserai, I think, as well. So he was able to target that meta in a way. Prism's strong, right? Like, Prism has this ability to be very strong. It's not like it inherently has a bad game plan. Not at all. There's some of the heroes out there I think have weaker game plans than average. Prism is not one. It's just about the meta. So interesting spot coming into this format. What does Prism get then? What does Illusionist get?
Yeah, so let's first talk about Fractal Replication, because this card is hilarious. If you watch our video, you'll see peak Fractal Replications played during that video. It's interesting because it seems like a card that's easy to play around, but when you look at some of the new auras like Coalescence Mirage and Miraging Metamorph, then it gets a lot harder, because they actually stay on the combat chain unless they're broken. And if you break them, there's a downside, right? Playing out the 0 cost aura, or potentially copying aura that exists, or responding to the trigger at instant speed and playing one of those light auras and getting 2 of them. You follow up with a Fractal Replication. It's pretty nasty. You can also play a Herald, like a Herald of Triumph, like I did in our video. Your opponent can full block it. It won't go to Soul, and then boom, you play Fractal Replication for 0, and it's another Herald of Triumph. The ceiling on this card is pretty high. I don't know if we get to a situation where people can effectively outplay it consistently. I don't think so in the context of things like Coalescence Mirage and Miraging Metamorph. What about you, Hayden?
So yeah, Fractal I think has it has a low floor, right? Because if you draw it and it's the turn that your opponent wants to break everything, that's harder, right? Whereas
the floor is terrible.
Right, but the ceiling is also really high. It's a 0 cost. Like it's the ceiling is really high, and that's what intrigues me. And I think so far people have been pretty down on Fractal, but that's because I think people's expectations were like through the roof with Fractal, and then as soon as they started playing with it, they're like, oh, this is actually a bit awkward. But I think when you utilize this card and look at how you want to plan it out, and you've talked about some of the cards that it plays really well with, like Herald of Triumph, Coalescence, those are two in particular I think Fractal works really well with, then I think there is more to this card. And I think we're going to see the stock of this card rise. I think it was like, initial thoughts was like very strong, dipped off, and I actually think this card is better now than what people think it is. But it has to be in the right list, and I think it has to be used the right way in the right matchup. And maybe it's not a 3 of, maybe it's a 2 of, for instance, because you never want to, you don't want to see, 2 of these in the same hand or whatever it is. So yeah, but I think the card is very strong.
All right. On to Miraging Metamorph. I think this is the strongest card.
Speaking of strong cards, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think this is like the best because it probably goes in almost every deck. Like in Herald decks, I guess it's less good, but it's still 1 for 7 in that case. But in Aura decks, the punishment for breaking this is so extreme. You don't even have to have an Aura on the board, right? If you have an Aura in Arsenal or in hand, you can respond to the trigger at instant speed, play that out, and then duplicate it. So yeah, I think it's the scariest card that Illusionist got from Everfest.
Yeah, Illusionist has become like the new Dorinthia. It's like, what am I playing around this turn? Like, oh, here comes a Herald coming in. Like, do they have the Fractal Replication? Do they not? What are they going to play afterwards? Do they have, like, if I let this hit, are they going to Tome of Divinity me? Like, what is going to happen here? And then same with Miraging Metamorph. It's like, okay, they have a 5-card hand. I actually don't think I can break this card because what if they respond to the defending card with like Genesis or something, and then all of a sudden they have 2 Genesis in play? That's gonna be very difficult for me to deal with. So
yeah, that's what I love about it. Like most of the time, if you have enough cards in hand, that can even make your opponent think that you potentially have an aura, they're not going to break it because it's so punishing. And if you have an aura already on board, if you have an aura already on the board, same thing. And then if they don't break it, that's when Fractal Replication comes in and is a very good card, 0 for 7. So a lot of synergy in these new Prism cards. Let's go ahead and talk about... Go ahead.
I just want to say one last thing. As the game goes on, these cards become better because it becomes harder to just say, I'll take damage. Your decision trees become more difficult as the opponent. So I just think these cards are like very good. And then as the game goes on, they get so strong because so say on turn 1, you come in with Miraging Metamorph, right? You say you play it into me, Brendan. We're both on 40 life. It's very easy for me to take that, and it's very hard for you to know what I'm going to do. But when I'm on, say, 4 or 5 life, it's very easy for you to know what I'm going to do because my options are more limited. So you get even more information of how to play cards like this. So yeah, I think just very strong. Just want to point that out.
Yeah. So next is Shimmers of Silver. This is a part of the blue 0-cost auras. They block for 2, and they have permanent effects. This one allows, whenever you attack with a Lucius weapon for the first time, once per turn effect, put a +1 counter on it. It's good, right? Like, again, that effect is less why I love Shimmers, and it's more that it's a weapon that will stick around in things like Luminaris builds. But this +1, it stacks up over time, and you can distribute it across some of your permanent auras as well. And yeah, it's a very, very powerful card. Particularly good. Like, these auras are so good when you do Herald, Herald, maybe Aura, and then drop one of these at the end, or you just play an Aura attack with your Luminaris, and then drop it at the end, and you're double Auraing. So I said the word Aura a lot, which is a hard word to say, but you get the idea. I think that these are a huge upgrade to that archetype in Prism.
Yeah, I mean, the art on this card is also fantastic. I haven't seen it in like blown up, but it looks so good. This Aura is the one that I think is the strongest so far from what I've seen. Just the fact that, like you say, that like sticky weapon idea is really good, and this does it to a new level where this just can buff itself. It can, it can buff a shield, and then it's like, okay, maybe you get to keep this for 2 turns because your opponent's having to deal with other auras, and then all of a sudden they're trying to deal with this, and you've put like 2 counters on a shield, and yeah, they may kill this, but you've still got a shield that's coming in for 3, for instance. So it's very difficult for... It's just a card that gives you a lot of value, and it looks on the face value, it's like, okay, well, I play it and then my opponent breaks it, and I don't, maybe I get a +1 counter on something. But actually, no, like, it doesn't have to go on itself. It can go on, you can attack with a shield first and get the proc. Like, it is a very good card. And yeah, I think so far, one of the blue cycles that I've been the most impressed with.
Mm-hmm. And quickly rounding it out, just quickly, we're going to talk about Haze Bending, right, which is another one of them. I think second best. It's whatever, Lucius non-token aura you control is destroyed, create a Spectral Shield token. Ends up, I think, pumping out a bit more value than you would expect if it sits on the board, which usually it does because it's not very threatening to your opponent initially, especially if there's other auras on the board for them to clear. So Haze Bending is probably one of my favorite ones from the rare cycle. And then I want to go into Coalescence Mirage. I think Coalescence Mirage is actually pretty underrated. That's this one in the context of these new zero cost auras. The cost to breaking this is so high, and I feel like this this ends up not being broken or defended more times than not.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Yeah,
I think I agree. I think Coalescence is very good. I think actually all the blue cycles of auras are good, and they're going to fit into different archetypes in different ways. So, like, I think they're all very close. I think Shimmers for me has been the strongest so far, but for instance, I could see a list that really uses the +2 or the stop the trigger of Phantasm on the first attack, for instance. Like, I think those can be very viable as well. So it's really going to depend on what the rest of the list looks like, because they all have good utility. Talk to me about what happens, like what's changed for Prism in this format. So of course Briar gets the nerf, right? So one of your worst matchups is significantly less impactful against you than it used to be. Plus you get all these new cards. What does that mean for Prism in this format? Like, what is Prism worried about now? And is, you know, the discussion was like Illusionist Prism with these cards is like the deck to beat for week 1. Do you think that's still the case?
In the context of SEG and the results that happened at that tournament, I think that Guardian is going to be the deck to beat, but I think Heavy Aura Prism is the deck that can beat that, right? Like an Aura Lock a Guardian. In that, like, with that being said, I think that our prediction is right. Like, Prism should show up. It should be relatively popular, and it actually should prey upon one of the other most popular decks. Starvo is a bit of an outlier, right? Because it can just high roll the living crap out of you. But I think Prism's one of the best, like one of the better decks to be playing into Starvo. Other than that, I think Prism was pretty good into, like, very good into Viserai. Like, I think it was Viserai's worst matchup in the last format. And now I think that it's like 95-5 in favor of Viserai. Like, I think it's almost hopeless for Prism to be Viserai.
Yeah, it's become very difficult. I think, so I want to caveat that. I think Prism is in an interesting spot because it feels like it got all these tools, but then the others have gotten tools as well that maybe actually end up being stronger. You know, Starvo could come up with an Okanol, you could play an Aura in response, but now it can also then come up with a weapon to break the Aura, so you're in this weird kind of position that previously couldn't happen. And then Viserai has become more aggressive. So do you think that is maybe a fact that Prism just kind of needs to change as well? Like the way we're thinking about the Prism builds right now is maybe not necessarily the correct way to look at Prism moving forward.
Yeah, it's a hard one, right? I actually think that Aura Prism is still the best choice.
Yeah.
I think that Herald Prism has more pitfalls if you end up taking that instead. So, like I said, it's a good deck, but I think it really struggles. Like, it just particularly really struggles into something like a Viserai, and, you know, maybe a Chain or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's these more aggressive decks as we'd seen in the past. So yeah, interesting spot for our Illusionist hero. Grades, Brendan. Where are you sitting? So I would tell you what, 2 weeks ago, before we even played much of Everfest, we started a little bit of testing. We saw, you know, deck lists being sort of brewed up. I would have given probably Prism or Illusionist an A-. I think I'm probably going to downgrade that to a B+. I still think there's a lot of tools here. I still think it has the potential to be a tier 1 deck. I just think that the early meta doesn't actually seem as favorable as maybe we thought it would be for Prism.
I'll give it an A-.
All right.
Even though I talked about how bad that one matchup was, I still think that it's one of the better choices into what we're currently seeing being represented in the meta.
Cool. Like to hear it. All right. We're going to move on to some questions from our community about Everfest. You know, we've talked for 3 weeks now about Everfest's impact on Classic Constructed, and we've covered a number of things. We've talked about every class, every hero within that class, and the key cards from Everfest. But there's definitely some questions out there about what does this actually mean? You know, what is the kind of the so what of all of this? So, all right, we're going to get straight into it, Brendan, with, you know, I think the question that's on a lot of people's minds right now. This comes from Rob the Gamer. Do you think Starvo is too powerful for the meta, or will the Runeblade Super Friends dominate?
I do not think that Bravo Star of the Show is too powerful for the format. I do think that it's powerful, and it's going to see success early in the format. I doubt that success will persist. I feel like that could be targeted. I mean, come on. But maybe I could be wrong. I'm disappointed though that deck is as powerful as it is potentially, right? If it did end up being resistant to players trying to develop strategies that particularly would try to shut it down, and it was able to get past that. I mean, that would suck. I mean, the thing is like I played that hero. I like playing it as well. It's fun, but ultimately I think it's kind of stupid sometimes. And I think the design is kind of. I just really don't like the design in terms of that being the most popular deck in Classic Constructed. It feels like it's a similar scenario, and we've talked about it a lot. Is if my first love, Kano, was the most popular deck in Classic Constructed. Yeah, I might like that for like a week, but it's so just different and annoying that it would actually be bad for the game. That's kind of how I feel about Starvo, to be honest. Like, because sometimes it just high rolls the living crap out of you, and it's just like, okay, cool. And other times, like it's a medium game, and yeah, that's normal. And then sometimes it's just low rolls, and it just loses as well. So, yeah, I'm not a fan.
Variance. Yeah, I also don't like the design of the hero, to be honest. Like the Go Again is really interesting to me. I would have liked to have seen something that didn't revolve around Go Again, but it is what it is in terms of the design space. The actual hero itself, I think, is going to be very prevalent, and this early meta is going to do quite well. I do think there is some potential ways to target it. My concern, though, and in fact, I think there definitely is ways to target it and to attack it. My concern, though, is that we're in week 2. This hero is very strong. I think there's some builds out there that are already evolving, and it, to me, feels like there's so much more design space to explore with this Bravo that the kind of the ceiling on it. When people talk about Lightning Briar, right? Like I could see the ceiling on that deck. It wasn't like, oh, there's other cards to necessarily explore. Like the deck felt pretty solved pretty early. This does not feel that way whatsoever. This does not feel solved early. It feels like, we haven't even touched Earthlore Bounty yet, and that equipment scares me so much. So, I'm a little worried.
I've seen additions that have already significantly improved the deck. I don't know if they've been making their rounds on the internet quite yet, but they are. They've made the deck much stronger, and yeah, I just like you. I'm worried because it's cool for the first few times, but if that's really going to be the number one deck, I think Fab might not be such a great game during that time.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I do think that we'll see some adaptation. It's just going to take a while because we're in a ProQuest season now, but I get a little bit of flashbacks to like Chain at the start of Road to National season. But I do think that this hero fundamentally doesn't quite feel the same in terms of just the maybe broken things you can do. But we'll see.
Feels like they designed it for fun and then ended up like this.
Yeah. Let's move on. We've got a lot of questions here, so I want to definitely cover a few if we can. This one comes from the Frog99. Frog99. This is a question I've actually had from one of our patrons as well, Nathaniel. So do just want to make sure we answer this question. Curious on your approach to figuring out a new set and metagame. Do you prefer or tend to alter decks from the previous meta until you feel like they're getting onto something? Or do you like building new stuff completely from the ground up?
Hayden, you're much better suited to answer this.
I think it depends, honestly. Like, I think the easiest place to start is always to take something that's built and tuned and tweaked and say, okay, how could this evolve? What's the evolution of this? So that's often where I'll start personally, is like, is there heroes from the previous format? Like Lexi, for instance, I talked about. I felt like there was a Lexi deck prior to Everfest that felt quite strong. So what is the iteration of that? Like, where do I start there? On the flip side, right? Something might be completely different. It might start completely from scratch, like one-handed Dorinthia decks. For me, that's starting from scratch. That's where can I completely innovate on something? Where can I what is something new that I can come up with? So it really depends, I think, on. And I would personally don't start any which way. I think the thing I'm looking at in Everfest is like, which cards grab my attention? What would those cards look like to me? Would they look like an addition, or would they look like something completely new? So that's generally how I look at it.
I prefer to alter no matter new set or not. Which
you do.
Yeah, which I don't think is necessarily a good trait, but that's just how it is.
Yep. A lot of questions about Starvo here, which I think we've kind of talked about Starvo quite a bit, and I'm sure we'll talk about it in the future weeks as we talk about the ProQuest season as it starts to unfold. Question here from Tom Roadrun. Do you think even bigger than that is enough to keep Katsu in the meta? I can ask this one first. I'm unsure. I think the card is very good. I don't think it's just even bigger than that. I think it requires some of the cards from Everfest to work well together. Even bigger than that, I think allows you to play the Rushing River line and really probably exploit that, which is the thing that I'm most excited about. Is it good enough? I'm not sure yet. I think it's really going to depend on how consistently you can get that to come together.
Yeah, so Katsu's interesting. I just to answer the first question, right? I don't think even bigger than that in a vacuum is going to do it. But the way I currently see Katsu is that it is slower than Viserai and less dynamic as well. So yeah, I don't know where it lands because I think that's a more complicated deck to build, and there's a lot of cards that we can pull upon that actually haven't seen play in the past, like things from Crucible that could maybe push it over the edge. But right now, I think that it got a lot of upgrades, so I could see myself bringing it to a road to nationals, but currently I don't see it being dominant in the meta.
Mm-hmm. A lot of questions on Lexi as well. I think we covered that pretty well. We're both very excited about Lexi, so I hope that answers those questions. This is a good one actually. Which hero do you think is most likely to surprise us with a new play pattern not previously seen with that hero? And that's from Will Bradshaw.
Mm-hmm. Let me go first.
Yeah, sure. Why not? If you've got something on you.
Yeah, I mean it's Viserai. The deck is incredibly good. Traditionally, we've seen either a very reasonable mid-range version of Viserai or an OTK combo. I think it has now pretty much something that's in between that's can play mid-range, which is aggressive enough, but also just combo you off of almost nothing because of a card like Vexing Quillhand, which the power level on that card is severely underappreciated at this point, in my opinion.
Yep. For me, I think it might be. It's a tough one. I mean, the one-handed like Dorinthia springs to mind, right? Like that's something that we haven't seen before. But also, I guess like I honestly think that like a very aggressive dash deck could be there. And what I think it's going to hinge around is like how impactful T-Bone actually is, which is a card that I think has been a little bit sort of understated. That it needs to find the right meta, because I think you need to find this combination of being able to be like T-Bone into say like what's the magnetic shockwave, right? To really abuse that interaction to take advantage of blowing up your opponent's equipment. But it's really going to depend on which areas you're playing into, which equipment they're playing. Because if it's Crown of Seeds is the most powerful equipment in your opponent's deck, well, that it's gonna be hard to blow that up. Do you know what I mean? Like that doesn't work. So it really depends. But Dash is one that's interesting to me, and I think we might see a really aggressive sort of spin on that potentially. But yeah, we'll see what happens. But the other one would be probably Dorinthia or Viserai, as you say. I want to go back to. I'm just reading through the questions. We have a lot of questions about Bravo Star of the Show, and we did talk about. Yeah, I want to talk about. So there's a question here from Dagan. We all know how strong Starvo is at this point, but what are the counters to it? So I think there's something that I want to talk about in terms of just planting the seed of how to start to attack Star of the Show. And whenever I look at attacking a deck or a metagame, I think the first thing you have to do is understand fundamentally like what that deck is trying to do, right? So if we look at Star of the Show, fundamentally what that's trying to do is say, okay, I have really big attacks that have really relevant on-hit effects that are going to disrupt your turn, and I'm going to play those with this hero ability that then allows me to second step, go wide and present another on-hit threat with the hammer, right? So if we say, like what are the key ones that we're seeing? Oaken Olds, we're seeing Crippling Crushes, we're seeing Spinal Crushes, whatever it is. If me as a Starvo player, as a Bravo Star of the Show player, I'm able to play one of those and then into the weapon swing, I'm probably presenting somewhere between like about 15 damage to 17 damage, right? Depending on which card I'm playing, potentially more 17 with like a Crippling Crush. Then what does that look like? So it's that damage plus it's an on-hit effect of 2 cards plus it's an ice, a frostbite. So I think the first thing, if you're looking at how to combat this deck, is like, okay, how well does Bravo Star of the Show play up less cards? So if the Bravo Star of the Show opponent, if I'm forcing them in some way, shape, or form, maybe with on-hit effects, probably most likely to play off less than 4 or 5 cards, then what happens to their turns? Well, they start to get quite a bit worse, right? It's very hard for them to Bravo fuse at that point. They're going to need a pulse minimum to be able to do that. Plus, also, it's going to be hard for them to present a threat. So, I think on-hit effects are a really good way to look at attacking Star of the Show for, like an early sort of approach. And I think Lexi is potentially one of the ones that you want to look at to do that. I think there's others there that you could look at. And then the next one is like, okay, well, if they're coming in with this damage and these on-hit effects, can I stop the on-hit effects? And if I can, what can I do then after that? Am I just hoping to stop these on-hit effects and then try and wait for them to have an off turn and then I do my thing? Is that viable? Potentially. I think it just depends on the deck you're playing, right? Like the first thing that kind of springs to my mind is something that you covered on the channel this week, which is the defensive dash deck with T, right? Is that an option? Is a deck full of unmovables and defensive sort of tools that can then, on the off turns, get out items and start to grind down the Bravo Star of the shown opponent? Is that viable? So those are the two places. We're talking about counters. I don't have specific lists. I can't say I think these heroes beat it right now because we're so early in the meta, but I will happily share this is the place I think we start to look at.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're definitely working on it. I think on hit triggers are not enough, right? Like I think they have to be, you want on hit that is causing disruption. Because even if your on hits are threatening like more damage, the amount of damage that Bravo Star of the Show can put out when they are hitting that ability consistently might beat out most on hits that are threatening more damage, whatever it is, whether it's, you know, your lightning cards, your Katsu cards that are letting you get more cards, your mask momentum, you're drawing more. So I think disruption might be key.
Yeah, disruption's good.
But
yeah.
We've got to see, we need to figure out, we're still working on like how relevant things like defense reactions are, you know, if that, because obviously when you think about getting Okanolded for a bajillion, you're like, oh, if I had a D-react here, it'd feel pretty good. But it's like, okay, if I really have that D-react in my deck, does it take me far enough away from my game plan that I'm not even really winning the race anyway? So yeah, we're working on it, but I think disruption is theoretically the key.
Yeah, I think one of the cool things to look at is you look at these decks, and so far, I think the SCG has been a move on for these Star of the Show decks, and I think there's even better lists that are sort of people are working on now. But you look at the threat density, right? So traditionally, it was like Okanold and Crippling Crush for like the on-hit effects, and then it was just like, you know, some like Frost Fangs, whatever, which doesn't even work off Bravo anyway. You know, these kind of threats. So a threat density of 6, that's pretty manageable, right? From like if I can get through these, I get through the game. But once people start to add like, you know, Spinal Crushes and more stuff, does that become serviceable still to think of a game plan of where I can get through these threats and then execute my game plan? Maybe. It's certainly interesting, but I think it depends on what your actual game plan is. Like Brendan says, like, can I play my game plan off 2 cards? Can I further my game plan off 2 cards? If I can't, then it's going to be very difficult for me to enter sort of basically drop in a package that's very defensive. So I think it's really going to depend on, you know, like for Dash, for instance, okay, I defend with 3 or 4 cards, and then I still get to come in with my weapon. So I'm still advancing my game plan while also stopping my opponent from advancing theirs to a certain degree. So yeah, I think it depends.
Yeah, and if your on-hit triggers are just threatening more damage, you are also just playing into
what they want to do.
Oh, well, you play into Awakening. So not that you should completely change your game plan around a 3 of in the deck, but I mean, you can get heavily punished for having a disparate life total.
Well, I think you also play into their game plan, because their game plan is to say if you're playing a 5-card hand deck that wants to advance the game by getting, you know, synergy and triggers off those 5 cards. Well, you're kind of playing into your opponent's, the Starvo's kind of game plan, because they want to disrupt your 5-card hands. So they want you to actively take damage and try and advance your game plan while they disrupt it. So I think trying to battle 5 cards with 5 cards clearly, I think, is not the right way to do it. So
maybe if we had Plunder Run.
Maybe if we had Plunder Run, but we don't. Okay, we're kind of getting long. I want to. There's so many questions about Starvo. I hope we've kind of answered those and given people. I wanted to sort of wrap that up, Brendan, with that kind of just talk about how we are approaching attacking this deck. I think because it is attackable. Any other questions? There's some really cool questions we might answer in a future one. Here's one from Flake. I want to get Flake's question in here. Our friend Matt. Go check out Flake's podcast. Is this the end of talentless class heroes? Will we see just a ninja or just an illusionist again? I think this is such an interesting question, given that Everfest is a talentless set. Well, for the most part.
You are very passionate about this. The answer to this one.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm passionate. I just think it's.
But you have you have an answer and you have a theory, and I think that since you've given me that theory, LSS has followed it pretty perfectly. So why don't you?
Yeah, I think it probably is, to be honest. I think this is the end of talentless, most likely. I think we probably get some talentless heroes in the form of, like we've seen with Everfest, with you know, young heroes. But Bravo is our newest hero, is talented. I just can't see a way in which they introduce talentless heroes now when they're going region by region to explore things. I think it's very difficult unless it's in things like this, like a completely talentless set, sans the Bravo, which is focused on, giving everything to every class as a sort of an addition. When it comes to this new kind of exploring of landscapes and of the world of Wraith, I just don't see it. I could see we even get, I called this in a happen, right? We've talked about this, and this, I have to give credit to Jason Long here, but he gave, this kind of theory of like, we're going to see the old heroes come back in talented ways. And I thought, yeah, that makes sense, right? As a time in their life where they're talented. And we've seen that with Bravo already. We fully expect to see it with all the heroes in this game that are currently talentless. And I don't expect to see new adult heroes in base sets that are talented, that aren't talented.
I disagree with you. You're the big brain on this one.
Last question, because this is for Brendan. Do you expect to see some Kanos come out with some of the new Everfest cards? If so, what are your thoughts on the new weapon and it taking the place of Crucible? And this is from Jordan. He says, I imagine not having an easy access to +1 to cards like Sonic Boom would be a big decision to factor in this. Thanks to Jordan. Jordan's out in Perth. Shout outs to the Perth community.
Yeah, so we talked a little bit about Aether Vein and the Kano section of this. And I don't think that it replaces it, but it does. I think it's a different archetype, right? It's an archetype where, you are depending on Crucible to give you that breakpoint on things like Lessons in Lava, Sonic Boom, whatever it may be. And instead, you're able to play the Crucible of Aether Vein on your turn. And basically, all the information your opponent has at that point is, do I want to commit an entire card to 1 damage? And you're right, they could pitch a blue, and they have 2 resources left over for whatever you come in with after. But maybe you don't come in with something, right? Maybe it's a potion, and they've wasted their card. I think it just gives you a lot of agency and potential power as the Kano player, and then that could stack up over time. Particularly in something like Blitz, if you activated this 3 or 4 times and actually hit the opponent, it's quite good, right? That's a lot of damage, getting close to like 20% of their health. So I think it's stronger than people expect. It's stronger than people think it is. But ultimately, it doesn't just kind of slot in and replace Crucible. Do I think that Kano will be represented in the meta? I don't know. It really depends. I think Kano is one of the most meta-call-ish kind of heroes that exists in Flesh and Blood, right? It doesn't really do well into a blind format, at least at this point. In the current context of what we see, which is a lot of Starvo and a lot of Prism, it does seem like it might be a little rough, just because Starvo does so much damage, and they're also giving you Frostbites, which are not great for Kano. But I imagine the play pattern would be there is that you'd be taking the damage, playing it into speed, dodging the hand disruption effects, as well as dodging the Frostbite because it would break, because you would drop your cards at the end of your turn rather than ever playing on your turn. Would it be fast enough though? That's a tough question. It actually could be decent into Starvo potentially, but I don't know. I still think it's probably bad in Prism.
Yeah, I don't really have much of an opinion at the moment on Kano. I think, again, like Brendan says, meta call, and it'd be interesting to see what players come up with. There's clearly some power there, and we did talk about that in part 1 or 2? Part 2, I think. All right, Brendan, that's there's so many more questions. I want to give a big thank you to everyone who did submit a question. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. I think some of them were very, like similar veins, talking about the new format, talking about Bravo style of the show. There's a couple other questions that I wish we could have got to, but just don't have time. I'll try and answer those on Twitter if we can as well. So big thank you to everyone for submitting their questions. And it was cool to do this. I like that we got to kind of have some listener questions to tie up this kind of Everfest and Classic Constructed. It's been 3 weeks of talking through the new set. There's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of things that are going to happen. We're coming to ProQuest season right now, Brendan, right? So this format is going to immediately start to evolve and to take shape as we head through the ProQuest season. I'm excited to see what that looks like. I'm excited to play a few different sort of like styles and heroes and classes through this ProQuest season and see what kind of emerges as the top dog post ProQuest season heading into the first Pro Tour.
Usually, it doesn't look like what we think it will, week 1. It is dynamic, and it does change, and people come up with new stuff, so I'm excited as well. I'm very bummed I can't play week 1. This is very atypical for the AP pod, but I do want to give a shout-out to somebody, which is Hemal Patel. He is a merchant on Facebook, mostly, I think. Hayden and I don't know if we mentioned him before, Hayden, maybe it was in a time around, but he went the extra mile for me, Hayden, and Dante at the Calling Orlando. particularly to help us get some cards. And recently, he helped me acquire an entire foil, set of Everfest, which was really above and beyond, because that is not easy to do as a merchant. And he just, I don't know, really hooked me up. Great price, great guy, and I think he's underappreciated. And he's helped out the Arsenal Pass podcast guys, Hayden and I, a lot.
Yeah.
So shout out to him, and yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, if you're out on Facebook trade pages, look out for Himmel, and please use him. I think he's one of the best out there, and he, as Brendan says, he's so reliable and goes the extra mile. All right, Brendan, let's wrap it up. Say thank you to everyone. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can. If you're watching on YouTube, you can actually see our handles right down here. You can check us out. But Brendan is at Brendan APG. Brendan can't find it. I'm at Fian_Dale, like the tunic or the tome. I want to give a big thank you to our patrons. We've actually just crossed over 500 patrons, which is mind-blowing, Brendan. I can't believe the support that we have, and just how invested people are in what we're doing, and giving us the opportunity to do this, and to create gameplay, create deck text, bring people like T on, bring our guests on that we do on Time in the Round. So huge shout out and a massive thank you to everyone. If you aren't a patron and you want to become one, it's very easy. Links down there. You can join up, get access to our Discord, to our additional podcasts every month, to our deck techs and our analysis videos. And if not, just enjoy our free content here on YouTube, and drop a comment and say what you like about it. Otherwise, Brendan, we'll be back next week, where I'm pretty sure we'll start to talk about ProQuest season and a few other things that pop up.
Yeah, ended up going, it was pretty nice, right? Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and then we get a nice analysis-based podcast off the results of recent tournaments. So I'm excited.
I do love numbers. Anyway, until next time, we'll see you in the next one.